relationship between public health and cities has had an enormous impact on shaping the built landscape. During the 19th century, in France, England, and America, massive civic projects were implemented to bring nature into the urban fabric. The goal was to make the city a healthier and more civilized place. The development of the suburbs was also a consequence of public health concerns. By the early 1900s in America, the city itself had become a threat to one's physical and social health. People left the city altogether in search of a natural setting in which to raise their families. They fled to America's new towns. Sunnyside Gardens in Queens, New York, was designed in 1924 by Clarence Stein and Henry Wright. It was imagined as a utopian community and was the first of its kind in America. Sunnyside Gardens promised a carefree and healthy lifestyle outside of the hectic and unsanitary conditions of the city. The name itself conjures the American dream. But at the same time that the New Towns movement in America was gaining momentum in the 1920s, a social imperative was building toward purity and cleanliness within society at large. The idyllic lifestyle promoted in Sunnyside Gardens was part of a broader fantasy about civilized American behaviors that related to one's ethnicity, one's education, one's hygienic practices, and one's moral code. By 1924, New York supported a tremendous immigrant population. Most were housed in crowded and unsanitary tenements. Now, by this point, New York City tenements were a widely recognized problem. Jacob Riis's groundbreaking photos of tenement life had been published 30 years prior, and in 1916, New York City enacted the first zoning resolution to curb growth. But industry and overcrowding still made the city a stifling place for the urban middle class. The Sunnyside Gardens brochure spoke to these concerns. It read, "There's one problem that most folks in New York have in common these days, unless they border on the millionaire class. That is the problem of where to live, how to find living quarters with light, fresh air, gardens, and a place to play for the children at a price that isn't too heavy a drain on the family income." The subtext was that the city bred squalor, and that the people who lived there were of lesser moral standing. This connection between light and fresh air and good moral standing had been made before. Frederick Law Olmsted delivered an address to the American Social Science Association in 1870, entitled Public Parks and the Enlargement of Towns. He asserted that public parks improve public health by mitigating air and water pollution, that public parks prevent social degeneration, especially among children of the urban poor, and finally that public parks, in their inclusiveness, are the ultimate manifestation of democracy. In his address, Olmsted linked access to sunlight, clean air, and greenery to good citizenship, morality, and the prevention of degeneracy. This preoccupation with purity in the 1920s was fueled in part by the passing of the Immigration Act in 1924. Congress enacted this legislation to control who was able to enter the country. The act perpetuated the notion that immigrants had physical and mental inadequacies. It amplified fears that these immigrants, these strangers, would infiltrate American culture and create a degenerate population. Eugenics was a quest for genetic superiority within the human population. Eugenics offices were commonly found on main streets across America. At state fairs, families volunteered to answer questionnaires at eugenics booths to determine their, quote, goodly heritage, and photographs of winning families were printed in the local paper. Good heritage always tied back to good citizenship. Thus, it was in your best interest to seem as un-immigrant as possible. Luckily, American corporations were there to tell you that it was not only good breeding that could make an ideal American, but proper hygienic practices. Cleanliness also meant moral purity. The most obvious were advertisements selling soap. The care of the body was presented as a moral discipline. The language in the Life Buoy advertisement implies the idea of an other who is unclean. The advertisement reads, "We mothers can't avoid all the danger. We